today we're really going to be looking at trends in board composition and director remuneration, and looking at what that is, and almost going back to the basics, and then really driving forward and diving a little bit more into it. By way of introduction, my name is Beverly Hancock. I am a partner at Sadar and head up the appoint team. So we're really very focused in terms of board appointments across Africa, and a fascinating space to be in. So whether it's a new board that is looking to take on non-executive directors or independent directors, or in a well-established board that is looking to appoint again and looking for the most effective composition as well, we work with those boards. So to kick off, I think much of the conversation today, or a lot of the results that we're going to talk about today, stem from the recent survey that we did, and that is the 2021 annual Africa-wide non-executive director survey report. So Lynn is going to drop into the chat box, I believe, the details for you to actually access this report and receive a complimentary copy of the report. And we look forward to you being able to take this and really expand on all the details that we've provided today. What I'd like to do today actually is really start on why the focus on a board. And I think it is important that we do that, because so often, whether you have just started a company and you're a director, or whether you sit in a sort of 10,000 employee, 100,000 employee company, it is about understanding why the board. And that is understanding what the company is and the interpretation of a company. So a company is a separate legal entity. There is no such thing as a business owner, if you think about it, because you cannot own a business. And that often comes down to understanding what we call the three hats, that of wearing the hat of a shareholder, wearing the hat of a director, or wearing the hat of a manager. And a company is governed by a board of directors. So whether you have one director, you have two executive directors, or you have six directors, of which there is a diverse spread of independent and executive, it is still governed by that board of directors. And certainly what we would like to see as a company is that it generates a return on investment for all shareholders. And just a point to take a step on and think about, and I'd love to know really where you sit, what your position is now. Do you sit on a board? Are you senior executive? Are you looking for a non-executive director position? Because that'll help us as well. But I think it's really important to understand for everyone in leadership that your management meeting is not your board meeting. And that's understanding the role that a non-executive director plays, an executive director plays, and what they actually bring to the table and the outcomes of what they bring to the table. So please indulge me while I spend just a moment talking about the three types of directors. And I think it's important to understand, because so often, even ourselves, when you are looking at board positions, you're interested in roles, you're talking about boards, there is some confusion. So just to confirm, an executive director works within the company as an executive with day-to-day responsibilities on either a part-time or full-time basis. You've got your non-executive directors who are not involved in management decisions, but they could be a shareholder, could be a supplier, could be a consultant, could be incentivized by performance or connected to the company in some way, other than just being a director on that board. And then we have independent directors. Now, your independent directors do not hold shares. are not a supplier, are not a customer, are not related to the executives in any way or the shareholders. They have no interest in the company other than their role as a director and to see that business and that company, that organization as successful and sustainable in a sustainable manner. Welcome, by the way, to those others that have joined us. It's nice to see you joining us today. We're really sort of kicking off and understanding just the terminology and the basics. And we're going to now head into a little bit more of a discussion around what we're here for today. And bear with me one moment, because I have the unique ability to do just what I've done. Okay, so today's conversation is the impact and value of understanding and managing board composition for optimal outcomes and remuneration for board members. Let's understand, I think, first of all, because when we talk about board composition, we're going to go into that quite a bit. But let's understand, first of all, when we spoke about executive, we spoke about non-executive directors, and we looked at independent directors. So what are the value of independent directors on a board? Because so often, as a newly forming board, you're concerned that someone's going to come in and take your business away or take your business decisions away. An established board, you're wondering if they're the right non-executives for your board. And, you know, the cost composition that comes into as well. Often there's a misperception around that. So this really is a sort of highlighting the value of independent directors. And for many of you, you may have already understood, you know, from King 4, the King 4 report in South Africa, which really speaks to a unitary board, which reflects a balance of power. And that balance of power is very important. It's adding additional independent perspectives. Your independent directors bring an independent objective view that challenges current thinking, provides a balancing element between the different shareholders, fresh and innovative perspective, can cast a critical eye over the business without preconception or prejudice, given that they do not have ties to the business, something we spoke of earlier. Bring a level of business knowledge and experience in many areas, as well as new skills and knowledge, possibly missing within the existing board. We often say at SADAR that the industry is not as important as the other expertise and experience that is brought into the boardroom. And that may depend on the industry. There must be some level of knowledge required. But the reality is that often that experience is sitting in the boardroom already around the industry. And it's what other areas do we need to understand and bring on board, bring into our boardroom. So certainly they may potentially add more discipline and focus to board meetings, especially when you are bringing on an independent director who has sat on boards before, or an independent chairman who understands an effective process in terms of running board meetings. And often they can serve as an objective judge of disagreements. When you have got partners, for example, sitting, or shareholders sitting around a boardroom table, and sometimes we lose focus as to what we are doing. And also there's the opportunity to potentially, for a board of business, to potentially bring benefit from their business and other contacts and connections, and vice versa. But really that we don't want to align with, we don't want to misalign in terms of independence, but often it's about a network when we're talking about this particular point. All in all, your independent director is going to act as the custodian of the rights of all shareholders and all stakeholders. Any questions at this point, please don't hesitate to make a note. What I'd like to do now is sort of dive a little bit deeper into board composition And then on from that, follow on to director remuneration, and it'll add on there. Any questions you've got from that, please feel free to ask. Today really is about sharing with you our findings from the survey report, from the 2021 SADAR survey report, and the changes from the year before, for example, that we've seen. And we've actually seen it physically when we are working in business. So if we look at board composition, I think the first thing is, what is board composition? And that, once again, we can look at a number of areas and a number of meanings through that. But really, it reflects the mix of the skills, the independence, the diversity, and the tenure of a board. And often, when we look at diversity, for example, and we do here, we're going to look at our survey findings that look at ethnicity, at gender, and at age, and how they impact board decisions and business results. But also, I think it's important here to look at diversity of thought. And my learned colleague, Roger Hitchcock, will often say cognitive diversity. And that diversity of thought is really broad in terms of what can people bring into the boardroom. And absolutely, you have the gender, ethnicity, age, you have experience, you have location, you have a lot of different areas to consider as well. And that's where it's important to say, well, what is my business about? What am I looking for? What is my strategy moving forward? What do I need to support my board and my business thinking moving forward? What am I looking to do, and where do I want to grow? So why diversity in the board impacts your board decisions and business results? So I'm going to show a couple of slides here, a couple of images here, and whilst we can talk about them, I won't dive too deep into it. These you will find in our survey report. But as mentioned before, we looked at 3 areas. The first image you see to your left is age. You then look at gender and you see ethnicity. So the first one is age. And we can see that the average age remains between 45 and 49 years old in the boardroom. Now, of course, you're going to have those that are older in the boardroom, and you're going to have those that are younger. But what we are seeing is we're seeing an increase in the proportion of members who are 35 to 44 years old. And we have to ask ourselves why. I mean, we can definitely see that there is a need in today's world, with an increase, COVID having pushed forward potentially a lot of the online movement and way of how we do things, for those that understand technology at a greater level. Another point that we see is that the markets of companies are changing. So whereby in the past, for example, in the motor industry, it may have been that the market was 40-plus-year-old white male buying his next car. You now have a growing market, and a market that is younger female. So it's about understanding that market as well. So there's a number of areas and reasons why age is an impact and has an impact on those that are sitting in on your board, and how they affect board decisions and strategic decisions moving forward. The next one that we look at, and as someone who's an advocate of diversity in the boardroom as well, and diversity of thought, but certainly gender diversity as well, is the improvement in female representation. And bearing in mind, we are looking at privately owned and family owned businesses in the survey report, which are so often neglected when we look at surveys across Africa. You know, mostly the surveys are aimed at listed entities and publicly owned enterprises. So there is a conflict there in terms of outcomes. from director fee recommendations to board composition, etc. So I myself in business, in appointing members to boards, have certainly seen a focus on an understanding of why a diverse board is more powerful. Here we see that in 2020, only 23% female representation. And here we see a growth to 40% of those respondents. And here's an interesting point, that boards with at least one female director on that board report a higher impact on company performance and increased EBITDA compared to the previous year. And we can actually see the same findings when we move across to ethnicity. Now, we've seen an improvement there. 46% of boards still have one ethnicity represented, but there's certainly a far greater percentage of boards now that have more representation. And the same thing applies. If you're looking at what is that impact on business, boards with greater ethnic diversity report higher EBITDA once again than the year before, and an overall board impact on the business, a far more positive board impact on the business. So those are three very interesting points, and the changes that we have seen throughout this time. I see we have got a comment here, just want to see. Is there a right mix of the three types of directors on a board? Yep, very good question. I think it is important that you have, it's important to have all three. And often what you will find is that you will have your executive directors, your CEO, you've got your CFO potentially, and potentially shareholders in the room that are non-executive directors. But then you have your independent directors. Now, average boards, probably between 5 and 6 of those surveyed. You know, you see up to sort of 12 members sitting on board, and you see boards that are about 4. But it really is important to start bringing in your non-executive, independent non-executive directors. And certainly something we recommend is your independent chairman. So to have a chairman who is independent. Now, let's just have a look here if we take that next step as well. And we go down to outcomes when you address your current board composition. Okay. So what we've seen is that boards with at least one independent director are evaluated as significantly more effective than boards without any independent directors. So we see here that even one independent director is creating, in terms of the process and evaluation and perspectives that are seen, the greater outcomes. And interestingly enough, in the survey report and the findings, should I say, 88%, I think it was 88% of those who responded and have independent directors on the board would not remove any independent directors on their board. And that is because they actually bring the independent thought. We find often with female directors, the reality is they're not afraid to ask the hard questions. They will dive deeper. They bring empathy and understand different areas as well within general conversation. The same with ethnicity. It's an understanding of different backgrounds, thought processes, ways of looking at it, strategic decision-making processes, and with age as well. So there's that whole process of looking at things differently and perceptions, and being able to bring that into the boardroom, which affects strategic decision-making. And also, you know, you have this, it's important to understand the experience that you bring into the boardroom, and really what you need to fill the areas within the board that are missing. So often it could be something as simple as bringing someone in who really has strong financial acumen, if you don't have, and that's okay not to have it, but bring someone aboard that has that. The same as someone who potentially understands, how do we grow? We want to grow into Africa. Well, how do we do that? Well, do we have that knowledge? So let's bring someone into the boardroom that can support that process. And for outsiders that look into the business, they want to see that a board has got independence and independent thinking, as well as obviously a very good, strong base within the business as well. So it's all really important to address all of those sort of areas. If we look at director remuneration, it's always an interesting one. And I think, once again, so many people get scared off from bringing on a non-executive director or independent director because they think it's going to cost me like a fortune and I can't afford it. And I think this is often because the surveys that we see are aimed at listed companies, at public entities, and the focus has been that. So it's resulted in a knowledge gap. So whilst we say it's always important to actually get a professional advice when you are either setting up a board or redefining the remuneration offerings within your board, it is interesting to see what we have here and what has been defined. So we're looking here specifically at non-executive and independent director fees. As mentioned before, there is a knowledge gap in this space. So SADAR and hence SADAR and the survey reports for Africa have proved invaluable in being able to support decision-making around this space. So what are the drivers of board fees? I think here, what we see that the main drivers continue to be the annual turnover of the organization and the company size of the organization, the company size. We also see certainly that the location, interestingly enough, the management structure, and then the industry all have a role to play in that. But it's still a big focus on company turnover and number of employees. These continue to be the drivers. And we also see that the fees are significantly higher in the findings in Southern Africa versus that of East and West Africa, for example, in this space. So if we have a look here, I'm going to really talk through these because once again, images are one thing and you can see this in the survey report, but let's really highlight what we're looking at here. When we look at the left, it really is a case of looking at independent directors and non-executive directors and turnover, business turnover. What we do is we convert all fees to dollars obviously for comparison purposes. But this will give us some insight certainly. And what we see is that there is a reflection. The higher the turnover, the higher the director fees. And also what we've found interesting is that over in this survey, contrary to the previous survey, that independent directors are earning higher fees than non-executive. So the truly independent directors are coming on board and they're being recognized for what they bring to that board, and they are earning higher fees than non-executive directors. In our middle image here, we see that companies with over 200 employees are paying higher fees. So that's in these findings. If we look at the size of organization, it is the 200 plus organization whereby higher fees are being paid out to directors. And then, as mentioned earlier, if we look at the far right-hand side slide or diagram, fees are significantly higher in Southern Africa than in West and East Africa. And we would say that I think it was 26 respondents or 26 of those who responded, should I say, earn more than $10,000 per annum. And in fact, that is when the variable comes in, and indeed when it's important to understand what director fees are in relation to your organization. And that's why we say it's always important to then attain professional advice, which is something that we do as well. So that is per annum. So Jet, you asked a question there, per meeting, per annum, etc. I think a good point though is that director fees are also, we need to take into account, and organizations do take into account, the number of board meetings that are being held, the number of committee meetings that a person is actually going to be attending and sitting on. Is that person the chairman or a non-executive director? And that's really when you start looking at within the board itself, what are the main distinctions? And that then becomes, is that a chairman role or not? Recognizing the committee involved and recognizing the committee involvement. So that is quite important to look at as well. Now, equity and supplementary remuneration. I'm really going to touch base on this and just sort of read through what the findings were as well. And that is that of those surveyed, 85% of board members surveyed indicate that they do not receive any equity in any form. 52% indicate they do not receive any supplementary remuneration. And of those that do, it would be additional attendance fees for in-person meetings, attendance fees for teleconference, and committee membership fees. And something that we do recommend is that, you asked about annual versus meetings, is that as a director, you are never actually off duty. There's a reality in that. You have a fiduciary duty and so forth. And so you're never actually off duty. And even though we find companies often pay out quarterly or per board meeting and committee meeting, our recommendation is that you actually pay on a monthly basis. And that is then spread out, your annual fees spread out over the year and paid on a monthly basis. So that will depend on the organization, but that is something that we find, and that's something we do tend to recommend. Now, interesting for us, and please, this is a time where any other questions you've got, we would love to look at that for you, address it for you. I hope that you have taken down the link that Lynn provided for the survey report as well. And I am more than happy to have a discussion with you around the conversation today, around director fees, around board composition, around the value of having independent directors on the board. This is a poll. We'd like you to answer this, please, and please put this into your chat. What would help you the most when wanting to appoint a non-executive board member? We're interested in what you find. So the director fee recommendation, to understand how much to pay, is that the challenge? I may want to take in a board member or another board member, but I don't know what is a fair fee. That's A. B, this network of potential candidates outside existing networks. It's great. I want a non-executive. I want a really independent board member who's going to be fantastic and align with the needs of my board. But I don't know how to find them. That's B. 3, C, deeper insight into what the ideal non-executive director profile is for the board at that time. So what is the challenge? Understanding, what do I actually need in this board member? Who's really going to add value over the next 2 to 3 years, and why? D, is it professional support during the appointment process? Is it that you're kind of sometimes not sure how to go through this process? What are the questions to ask? Who to go to? How are you going to drive it through? And E, and we realize that there certainly may be many other areas. What is it other? You know, please provide those details for us. Because it's interesting, and it can often be a challenge when you are taking on non-executive directors, that whole starting process. Often, where do I start? And it can be, you know, we work with companies across Africa. So it could be that you are in East or West Africa, but you're actually looking for an EU member, board member, and you kind of go, I need an EU board member. And it's not about then going, but what else do I need? I need someone who brings in the financial acumen, or I need someone who understands Africa, business in Africa, or I need someone who understands, you know, it's asking those questions. So we really, really appreciate your responses, because we learn as well from you. And interesting to see that the responses coming through. Thank you very much for all of those that are responding. Certainly E, all of the above, absolutely. And a lot is C. So that's an interesting insight for us all to take away in the deeper insight into what is the type of director I need. And that type and that director profile is important, because it's like an onion. It's layers. Are the values there? Are they the same values? What is the expertise I need? What is the specific skills I need? What is the broader experience I need? Where does this person need to sit in terms of location? These are all the things that we need to really consider when we move forward. So also nice to see, absolutely, D there as well, professional support, because it is about taking the right steps and the outcome being a positive one, because you have found the right person. And you can actually see, we see the changes in the boards. We've seen the changes in business because of the board in a very positive manner. Interesting point, of course, is that SADAR, we are Africa's leaders in educator appointing and guiding boards, but a SADAR is a lead Sherpa. And you know, when you're climbing that mountain, and you can do all the homework and all the practice and walk up and down in those shoes and break them in and walk for months. But when you're climbing that mountain, the person by your side to get you up there safely, not only up there, but back down safely, is your Sherpa, is your guide. So I always thought that it was an interesting one to understand what SADAR meant at the end of the day. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you had an interesting session today. And please don't hesitate to reach out should you have any other questions. We look forward to chatting with you again. Thank you.